everyone hear me? Cool. So we have had so many sessions describing what kind of data to look for, what kind of metrics to observe. What we want to close with is once you have figured out what to measure and how to measure it, what do you do next? Like, how do you put all of this in practice? That's the how after the why. What we are going to do is start off pretty simple and then make it as complicated as possible as we go around so that by the time happy hour comes, you need a drink. But no, what we'll do is we'll first go into a simple definition of revenue management, and I would say it's slightly different from what we might have heard so far. Then we want to go into what levers do you have. So price is one lever, but there are plenty of other things that you can change around to maximize your revenue. The third thing we want to talk about is what frameworks do you have when you want to pull these levers. So we don't want you to go out in the wild and start trying out things without fully knowing what's out there, what has been done before, and have some structure around it when you want to try something new, and how to measure it, and how to monitor it, and how to track it. And then we'll close, pretty much. OK, so what is revenue management? Revenue management is optimizing your product availability and price to maximize revenue. Now, price, as we said before, price is one of the most common things that you look for. I'm going to also emphasize availability here because that's a uniquely vacation rental problem. Like, you might have a listing wide open, but you might not want to sell it for single night or 2 nights. You might want to, you might refuse to sell it for even $1,000 a night because it's a single night stay. So availability is a part of the equation, and we'll go over this over and over again. But before we even get there, why is revenue management for vacation rentals so hard? There are multiple reasons, and there are industries where where revenue management has been done for a long time. It has taken a while to come to vacation rentals. The first big problem is each rental is unique. You're not selling 50 of the same thing. You're not selling 100 seats on a plane. You're not selling 50 rooms where 5 rooms can get sold for cheap, and then you can raise the prices knowing that it's ahead of the booking curve. Each one has a unique characteristic. You can't set the same price. The second one, and this is equally important, is in hotels and in airlines, you are maximizing the portfolio revenue. Whereas in vacation rentals, the owners of the asset are different. You can't maximize the revenue from 100 units and have 90 of the units take all of it and be happy with it, because then the 10 units that are not doing well will sooner or later leave. So you can't just have the goal as maximizing the overall revenue of your portfolio. You also need to make sure the distribution is more equitable. So that complicates things. The next one is fragmented supply. It's not easy, but there are plenty of property managers, individual hosts, rentals by owners out there, unlike other industries where supply is somewhat consolidated and things are a little more standardized. So you need to sometimes compete with the weakest link in the chain, right? And even if these factors did not exist, which they don't in some other industries, it's still one of the most complicated problems that people are trying to solve. Airlines still are pouring in millions of dollars. Hotels are still trying to figure this out, and they still have thousands of people working on these issues. So it's not like these issues complicate. They do complicate stuff, but it's not like if they weren't there, things would be easy. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, so now we go into what levers you have. So when we talk about levers, we also want to focus on the constraints. So in terms of levers, when you're looking at your future calendar for your properties, you can change the nightly rates, and we'll go into some frameworks for that. We can change the minimum length of stay that you allow for your properties, and we can go into that and why that matters. You can change length of stay pricing, and I think somewhere in the panel discussion this was discussed a little bit. Weekly discounts, monthly discounts, short stay premiums, and things like that. And then fees. And I'm not going to go into fees as much today because we probably don't have enough time, but fees are also something that is a lever that you can pull. Do you want to charge extra guest fee beyond a certain number of guests? Do you have data to back that up? Even if you have the data, how do you figure out when do you start charging an extra guest fee and how much that fee should be? But then all of these need to work within a lot of constraints that you have as property managers. One of them is distribution. So if it's not easy to change prices across all OTAs, if you're not connected to channel managers, you can change all these levers, but it'll take you months to change prices for that day that's already gone now. Then there are owner preferences. Like you can't do things that your owners are not okay with because you're in a contract with them. You have to keep them happy. You can't go below a certain number. Your owner might say, I do not want to take short bookings. So you have to respect those constraints and figure out what can be done within those constraints. And the last one is operations. You can't go out and maximize revenue and then realize we took so many bookings, so many short bookings, and so many Saturday checkouts that we can't deal with all the stuff anymore. So you have to make sure that your operations, your cleaning, your check-in operations, everything can still be done while you maximize revenue. There is always going to be that constraint to play with. So we'll now go into these frameworks for three different levers that we mentioned. The first one is nightly rates. We'll then jump into minimum length of stay, and then the third one is length of stay pricing. For the first one, on the top, you'll see the 4 frameworks that I will be talking about during this session. And then the one that we are going to talk about is going to be highlighted in a slightly darker gray than the others. So that's how you identify which one we are talking about. So the first one says fixed rates. And we have talked about this. So fixed rates, you can either have one single rate for the entire year, or you can have seasonal rates that change based on season or sometimes even events. Like somebody was mentioning they created a season for Christmas. That's pretty normal. But then you don't change it as often. And these are sometimes, this is basic revenue management that you figure out, yes, seasonal demand varies and we should change prices for it. It plays really well with 2 kinds of constraints. One is owners. Owners sometimes dictate for each season what's the price they want. And you can't really do much about it, so you do this. And the second one is distribution. If you're printing out, and even today there are companies that print out rate sheets for travel agents and ship them off to Europe so that they get bookings from Europe now. If that's a distribution model you're constrained to, you can't be changing your prices too often, then this is something that you can do. So if you have flight prices today for the entire year, this is in some ways something that you can at least move on to. From what we've seen, pretty much everyone knows this already. They already do this, so we don't have to go into more details about this one. And we have also spoken about, in other sessions, what kind of data can you use based on your historical portfolio analysis, based on market data, to be able to figure out what these seasonal rates should be. The second one that I want to talk to is dynamic rates. And I'm not talking about automated dynamic rates yet. It's just dynamic rates where you don't set prices and then forget about it. You still actively manage rates. So as an example in this one, the top chart shows in January, we set prices for the next 1.5 years based on our understanding of seasons. By the time March is ending, you might learn more about what's happening in your market. For example, you might learn that, hey, there's something happening in May end that's resulting in a lot more bookings, and maybe the rate was too low. And maybe for the remaining listings, we should bump it up. And you shouldn't wait till March ends to do this. You should be doing, hopefully, every week, if not more frequently. So every week, go in, check what's happening, look at your future-looking data, see how you're trending, and we'll go into some of that in a couple of slides. See what's happening in your portfolio for future-looking dates, and go ahead and make adjustments. Even if not internal and external data, there are times when you as a revenue manager might know that something is happening that is not showing up in your booking curves yet. So for example, if a conference or if a concert got announced yesterday, hopefully or possibly nobody is booking yet, and it's not going to show up in any data, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't proactively raise the prices. So if you find out that something big happened, go ahead, change the prices as soon as you can. If it's not resulting in bookings after a week, you can bring that back down. So be a little more proactive and reactive in changing rates depending on what you see in internal data, what you see in external data, and what your intuition tells you. The third one is automated dynamic pricing. And what you see in the chart here is that pretty much for every day, the price is different, and then as dates go by, these prices will keep changing. The important distinction between the dynamic rates and automated dynamic rates is automated ones are still going to be a lot more dynamic. For each day, you might have a different price, because instead of a human being having to go in and make changes, which could be super time-consuming, now there's an algorithm that's doing this, which is why every single day for a computer doesn't take too long to figure out what the price should be. Now, in this automated dynamic pricing framework, there are still two ways to do it. One is to look at your internal metrics and internal trends, the way hotels do it in a lot of cases, where they say, if I'm booked X%, if my portfolio is booked X% 3 months out, I want to raise prices by this much. If it's booked less than this much, I want to reduce the prices by this much, and so on. And then there is also external data where it says, maybe my internal occupancy metrics are not the right way to go. Maybe there's external data that suggests what the season should look like, and then give an algorithm parameters and let it do it. What we have somewhat seen be most successful is something called supervised dynamic rates. So it doesn't matter which kind of dynamic rates you're going with, whether it's manually adjusted, whether it's internal, whether it's using external data. You should always be monitoring certain future-looking trends or curves for your portfolio. So in this case, what the chart shows a booking curve for September, and it's comparing 2018 versus 2019. The curve itself is how many weeks out you are. That's the x-axis. So it starts at 1 year out, 52 weeks out. And then how occupied you are for September of a certain year, that many weeks out. And the dotted line is showing what happened in 2018. So it looks like 28 weeks out is where some sort of an inflection happens, and you start getting a lot of bookings. And then in the last 2 weeks, at the very tail end, you'll see another sort of a steeper curve happening. Now, in the red one, you'll see that, hey, my occupancy is trailing a little bit. You should be aware of what's happening in your portfolio to that level of detail. You shouldn't wait till September goes by to then go back and see, how did my September do? You should be seeing, how is my September doing on an ongoing basis? The problem here is it shouldn't be just occupancy. You should, like everybody else has been harping about, you should also look at ADR to say, hey, how's my curve looking? Why is my occupancy lower? So in this case, the occupancy is lower than last year, 16 weeks out, but the rates are higher. So you're like, okay, maybe that explains why I'm getting fewer bookings. If the red curve, which is the ADR, was also below the dotted curve, that's in some ways suggesting that there is weaker demand in the area because you're less occupied and you're cheaper, which means that either a competitor must have really slashed rates and taking all the bookings, or in general, the demand in the area is weaker. So just looking at these two charts will tell you a lot that you need to know about what's happening in your market, what's happening in your area, what are your competitors doing. But what also happens when you look at these charts is you could argue that the dotted line in either case is probably not the best way to do it. Why do we want to match last year? And the answer to that is you want to make sure as a business that even if there is no huge upside, if there's a huge upside, then great. But you want to track this and make sure there's no huge downside. I mean, you should make sure that, hey, if I'm going to make lesser revenue than last year, I should at least know about it a month out, or 2 months out, or 3 months out. So this gives you sort of a safety net to say, hey, I'm going to operate in this framework that will make sure that I at least track as well as I did last year. If not, I know the reason of why it's happening. It's probably because the demand in the area is softer or things like that. But most of all, you should also be tracking RevPAR to say, how is my revenue tracking across my portfolio compared to last year? If you just look at the occupancy, which is lower, and the ADR, which is higher, it doesn't tell you as much. But in this case, it looks like 16 weeks out, you're actually on a RevPAR basis at about the same point as last year. And because you're trailing in occupancy, you now have more empty homes and empty home nights to sell, which means you could potentially make more money than last year did. So looking at these three charts in combination, these are charts that I've sort of adapted from the airlines world, where pretty much at any time there are two kinds of algorithms running to figure out which one gives a better result. And you always track these kinds of things to figure out not just year over year, but you do one part of the portfolio on one set of rules or adjustments and another one on something else and see which one does better so that you learn which side of things, how should I do this next year, or how should you try to improve it even further next year. And lastly, we have looked at, so this chart looked at an aggregated set of data. So it's looking at entire month in some ways. What you should also be looking at on a frequent basis, and this is why I keep calling it supervised dynamic rates. It does not matter how your rates are changing, whether it's automated, you're manually doing it, whether you're feeding in adjustments, you should always be tracking what's happening on upcoming dates. So standing in August today, I can see that clearly there's something happening in December end that's resulting in a lot of occupancy. So that's the gray portion here is how much are you occupied already. And then the red portion is how much of that came in the last week. So that kind of the red portion will tell you, did something happen recently that's resulting in an uptick in bookings? The gray will tell you, is something, gray will usually indicate a holiday, and the red will indicate something, an event that got recently announced or something like that. So tracking these will give you some insight as to what's happening in your portfolio. If you want to make adjustments, what adjustments should you be making? And all of this, I mean, all of these curves do not even require you to look at any data from anywhere else. It's all sitting in your reservation data. All right, so that was pretty intense, probably. But the stuff now is going to be much simpler, hopefully. Minimum length of stay, and I said it's a pretty unique problem. I think Scott from Vicasa mentioned that if you have a multi-unit setup, you can play Tetris. What that means is people, when they book, even in hotels, you don't get assigned a room when you book. You get assigned a room when you check in. What that helps with is hotels can keep taking bookings without worrying about whether they have a long stretch available if somebody wants to book 7 nights or a month. If they get 2 reservations that have 2 days in between, and suppose they only have 2 rooms, all they'll do is they'll put both the reservations on the same room, and then they have the second room empty to take a long reservation. Vacation rentals don't have that luxury because people book properties. People don't book a property from your company. They say, I want this exact property. So if 2 people book, say December 25th to 31st, and another person books on a different property from January 2nd to January 6th, and a third person comes and says, hey, I want to book December 28th to Jan 3rd, you're out of luck. You don't have anything, right? So this is, in some ways, a unique problem to vacation rentals. You can't play Tetris unless you are in a multi-unit setup. So what are the frameworks that people have used to deal with this? And the first one, which is a little old school, but it works in some areas, is weekly rentals with Saturday-only check-ins. And it's really good in certain markets where people are used to it, to say, hey, Saturday to Saturday is all we'll take. It will ensure that if a week is empty, somebody can book it. There are not going to be any gaps, because if somebody can only check in on Saturday and only check out on a Saturday. So it works great in a lot of different ways, but there are some shortcomings. You're obviously foregoing a lot of demand. A lot of people these days do not want to book full Saturday nights, full week-long stays, and also then have the restriction of Saturday only. So there is going to be a small portion of the demand that's okay with this, that's historically used to it, but more and more people now are beginning to go into, hey, I want my vacation whenever I want to start it and however long I want to have it. I don't necessarily want Saturday to Saturday. So if you're not doing this, then you're foregoing that demand. The next one is when you start segmenting by season. So you might have been on the previous model where it's 7-night minimum, and then you go and say, hey, I'm able to book my calendar fully during summer or in my high season, whatever your high season is, with 7-night minimums. But in low season, I'm not getting it. And what you can do there is you can say, hey, sure, I don't want to take short stays in high season. I'll keep it 7, but then I'll start taking shorter stays when it's low season, whatever that number is for you, whether it's 5 nights, 3 nights. It depends. If you're in a city, even 1 night sometimes. And then the next one says, how about we start segmenting by booking window as well? And this is where you need to start understanding your own internal data pretty well as well, and as far as possible, try to get some external data to say, okay, we have segmented by season to saying in high season and around Christmas, we'll only take 7-night minimums. We have and we have said low season is fine to take 5 nights. But I also know that people who book, when I say I, it means you also know that when people book last minute, they are not looking for 5-night stays. If somebody is trying to book for a stay in the next week or in the next 2 weeks, they probably don't have the luxury of telling their workplace that, hey, I'm going to be off for 5 days. They probably are going to take 1 day off, either Friday or Monday, and say maybe for 3 days or 2 days. What if you could go in once in a while and say, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to reduce my minimum stay and make it 2 nights or 3 nights or whatever works for you again. That, again, is now segmenting by booking window. It's saying, if you're booking far out, I don't want to take these 3-night stays in 6 months out. I want to book as much as possible with longer stays. But if it's in the next 2 weeks and it's empty, chances of getting a long reservation are tough. Let's try and get booked with a shorter stay. And again, it depends on whether your operations allow it. It depends on whether your owners are okay with it, and so many other things. So this is stuff that you need to look through in your portfolios with your owners, looking at your data to figure out what's happening. And then I call this dynamic min stay plus because you can add so many layers to it. You can start saying, why just have one level for booking windows? Have 2. Like if it's in the next week, minimum stay is this. 2 weeks from now, it's that. 3 weeks from now, it's something else. If there is a gap between 2 bookings and there are only 3 days left, and you usually have a 5-night minimum, sure, I'll open up those 3 nights. But maybe I can now put in a premium to say, I'll open it these 3 nights, but I want to charge more for these because I usually don't take 3-night stays. Maybe you don't take 3-night stays because it's not worth it. But if you can make it a 3-night minimum and bump up the rates by 60%, now you're effectively saying, hey, if I make the same money as I would have made at a 5-night booking, maybe I can do this. So you need to be aware of all these things that can be done, and then go back and figure out what should be done based on your individual preferences. Let's come to length of stay pricing now. It's showing 0. Does that mean it's over?
No, you're good.
Okay. Sorry. I just realized that I should look at the time, and it said. Okay, so length of stay pricing. And this one I want to bring in, but I also want to say that the distribution capabilities on this one are not fully there yet. And what I mean by that is in different OTAs, in different markets, in different booking engines, these things work differently. So there will be a time somewhere in future where this is standardized, but it is not yet. So the frameworks that we have most commonly seen here are weekly and monthly discounts. So most people here probably do this, where they say, I have a nightly rate. If somebody is willing to book for more than 7 days, I'll give a discount. If somebody is willing to book for more than 30 days, I'll give a bigger discount. That's pretty standard across OTAs. That's pretty well accepted. Although I'm still not fully certain that how you come up with that discount is super scientific. There's room for work there from everyone's part. The second framework is something I've seen a lot of people in UK use, and it's called short break pricing, where in a lot of OTAs in UK seem to allow this, where you can say, this is my nightly rate. Whatever, if you book a 4-night stay, just add up those nightly rates, and that's what you get. If you book anything shorter, you have to pay the 4 nights price or 3 nights price. You can set this stuff up. And it's basically attacking the same problem. It's saying my minimum stay is 2 nights or 1 night, but I'm making sure I don't get too many of these by having the price for that 1-night stay be 3 times the nightly price for a 3-night stay. And then the last one is, hopefully this will come up soon, is where you have full control over length of stay pricing. So you have a nightly rate. If it's a 1-night stay, you can specify what premium needs to be applied. 2-night stay, a slightly lesser premium. 3-night stay, slightly lesser premium. 4-night stay, base rate. 5-night stay, slight discount. 6-night stay. You can play along this spectrum of length of stay discounts. And if you have no discounts, then you're kind of saying, length of stay doesn't matter to me. I'm OK with fewer longer bookings because at least when I get a booking, it's not discounted. I get the full money. But then you run the risk of having too many short bookings, which might be problematic for your operations. So on the left end, you're saying no length of stay discounts, in which case you might get a lot of short bookings. On the right side, you're saying, hey, I'll incentivize longer bookings so that my operations don't suffer, so that I'm able to do everything with the staff I have right now. So you need to find, and we all need to find, where in this spectrum you need to be. What's that magic number for these discounts or premiums that will let you do sort of a full spectrum length of stay pricing? And of course, right now, it's not as easy. There are only a few channels that I know of that support something like this. But I do think others are working on it. So hopefully, we'll be at a place in a few years, months, something, where these fields are standardized, where like PMSs can talk seamlessly with all the OTAs, or channel managers can talk with the OTAs seamlessly and have a uniform set of rules apply everywhere. Now, we've covered a lot of stuff, and I want to sort of summarize it in one slide. So when you go out after this conference and you want to practice revenue management, the first thing you need to do is understand demand and supply. So find out what kind of volume trends do you see in your market, what kind of segmentation do you see in your market. So volume is important to figure out what seasons are, what high season is when there's a big event coming up. Segmentation is important to figure out what are these travelers, why are they coming to, if it's a business traveler, they have different needs. They have a different booking window, they need a different minimum stay. If it's a leisure traveler coming with a large family, they're probably going to book much far out because they need to coordinate with a ton of different people to be able to finalize dates, and they're going to stay for much longer. So once you've figured out the volumes and the segmentation, then you can say, what levers should I start pulling in terms of rates, minimum length of stay, these length of stay discounts, fees, and all those things. But when pulling these levers, you also need to be very aware of what your preferences and constraints are in terms of operations, in terms of even risk preference. So in the booking curve, for example, the examples I showed, they deviate slightly from last year's. What if that curve starts deviating a lot from the last year's curve? At what point do you say, hey, I don't trust this system. Maybe if I let it fly till the end, it will catch up and lead to more revenue. But what if it doesn't? So at what point do you need to start intervening? What's your risk tolerance? If you have 100 properties, maybe you can try a new strategy with 5 properties and let it run all the way with the knowledge that these properties usually do really well and the owners are going to be OK with it, versus the other 95 where you're saying, OK, I'm going to keep this standard and repeat the process from last year and things like that. So try to find properties where you can do some experiments in pulling all these different levers after you've fully understood what needs to be done by looking at your data and by understanding what levers need to be pulled. And with that, it now says 4:35. So I think we have 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much. Now that's going to be challenging. Thank you so much. It was so insightful. And you raised more questions, and you raised more questions to the people in terms of what needs to be done and what really makes the needle move, right?
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the floor at all? There's one over there. Can you just tell us from where you're from as well?
Where I'm from? Okay. I live in Mexico. I am a Mexican citizen. I have a property in South Padre, Texas.
Thank you.
And there are strategies for revenue management in high season. Well, that's kind of easy. It's a matter of you want to be the last one to sell, probably, and whether or not you have the guts to wait or not.
Right.
And then managing the low season.
Right.
When if you see Puerto Vallarta, for example, September, October, you are going to have 500 fabulous condos just with fabulous view. How can you compete? I mean, I've done experiments reducing the price to half of what, and you will not sell anyway. So what will be the correct revenue strategy in those low seasons?
I'm not sure if that's as much of a revenue strategy question. Like you said, like you can reduce your prices to rock bottom. If there's no one coming, there's no one coming in some ways. But if there is someone coming, you need to figure out.
My point is that it is not a revenue management strategy. It is more a
distribution strategy.
Distribution strategy.
Right, yeah. So one is distribute everywhere you can, but also try different ways of marketing. This might not even be in your hands, but you can go to your DMO or whatever, your city council and say, hey, can we pour in some advertising dollars and bring some events during low season to boost this up? So I guess what I'm trying to say is revenue management can react to demand. If there is no demand, the solutions from a revenue management perspective are to reduce your minimum stay, reduce your prices. But if those are not working, it's very hard to solve that problem of nobody wanting to come to a certain place with revenue management. Revenue management in some ways is reacting to the demand that's there. What in this case sounds like the solution is marketing or more strategic initiatives from the city's part or something like that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense in the sense that revenue management is more when demand is higher than your supply. That's where really you can do a lot.
Right.
In the other side, it's channels or different strategies.
It's still there. When you reduce the price like you did, that is a revenue management strategy for low demand. You're trying to reduce your prices and saying, can I get some bookings now? And if not, then you try lowering it even more till you are allowed to lower. And then, it stops being a strategy very soon.
So it's a distribution is the challenge. So you just put your inventory on C-Trip and it's going to be booked.
Ned Lukes from Blue Tent. This is actually more of a comment, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I wanted to say thank you for bringing up length of stay pricing in this venue. I think that's an extremely important topic for this room. I was hoping it would come up at this conference, and I think that your projections of 2 years, though, are a little bit off because Airbnb, Booking.com, HomeAway, and Google Hotel Ads are all consuming data in length of stay format. It provides higher accuracy in rate distribution. It gives you much more flexibility in rate rules. And there's probably not a manager in this room with 3, 5, or 7 night minimums sometime during the year that couldn't replace those right now with premiums for shorter stays. We've seen managers working with us apply that strategy extremely effectively, especially in channel distribution right now. There's a couple of softwares that do support it out of the box right now. And if your software doesn't, I would encourage all of you to put pressure on them because the channels have all seen this as the only way to eliminate restrictions and drive rate and get accuracy.
So I'll play into your quote even more. Other than you guys, it sounds like you guys have it. I know of one other channel manager that has it, which means that from a revenue management software perspective, we can only do what channel managers allow today. But if the channel managers allow, that's great. Like Airbnb,
It applies absolutely to the algorithmic, pricing out systems as well, being able to generate rates and length of stay.
Perfect. Yeah.
Thank you, Ned. We have another question at the back there. Yeah.
Joel Berner, Turnkey Vacation Rentals. Question about when you monitor the booking curve, is there a natural shape to that that you try to fit, or do you just use it as a benchmark against last year?
It's super dependent on each property manager. One, it's super dependent on the location. And within each location, it's super dependent on each property manager and what kind of marketing they do, what kind of minimum stays do they have. It's such a complicated, intertwined topic that you cannot come up with one booking curve that will work for everyone. What we do is, this is now answering a PriceLabs question, but we don't, what we do is we try to come up with a market level price that we think for this market works. And then as users, people can say, hey, I want more early bookings and I'm going to tweak the strategy a little bit. because my portfolio works that way and things like that.
Any more questions? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Anurag, Verma.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Simon.